It's all very well to talk about how online information today is greased. That is, borrowing the term from James Moore, it's not just mobile, but hard to pin down, hard to stop, and it sneaks itself into all sorts of places. As soon as you write something, it could be anywhere, anytime, and very hard to remove. But the fact is, we live in a world of laws and regulation. And so to not consider the legal implications of the mobility of information would be naive. That's what this lecture pod is about. What are the legal implications of greased information? Or in simple terms, what are some laws that impact on the flow of information online? Here's some food for thought as we get started. Think twice before you publish a rant about someone in an overseas country, because you could be called to account for what you say if you ever happen to travel there. Now here's a picture of New Zealand. It's a beautiful place, but if you're like me, it could be dangerous too. More on that in a minute. Back in the day, the flow of mediated information was a lot more straightforward. Take the example of a print newspaper article. It was distributed from the publisher to the readers in physical form. You would read the article in your copy of the newspaper, and often different content would be tailored to the different physical places the newspaper was sold. When you were finished, you usually chucked the paper in the garbage, not the recycling, or left it on public transport because that's not littering, right? And you probably didn't share your newspaper, as they get a little tatty and seedy after you've had a good read. And let's face it, reading someone else's newspaper is a little like using their hairbrush. Or maybe that's just me. In today's environment, the mobility of mediated information is much more complex. It's kind of like mobility on steroids. James Moore writes that computerized information is greased to slide easily and quickly to many ports of call. Applying this theory to our example, newspaper content doesn't just get delivered to your door in print form. You read it online, comment on it, share it, link to it, and thanks to the boundaryless nature of the internet, it could end up being read anywhere in the world. A crucial thing to do with this sliding of information to different ports of call are all the laws and requirements of each place the material ends up. Now, back to New Zealand. Did you know that blasphemy is a punishable offence there? So if you're a little naughty like me and you take the Lord's name in vain sometimes, you'd be wise to watch what you say online about New Zealand if you plan on travelling there. Now, of course, my example drastically simplifies a complex situation and isn't entirely accurate, but you get the point, right? The aim of this lecture pod is to think about the legal implications of mobile greased content online. And we're not thinking about it because we're lawyers, but because we're media practitioners and theorists, and we need to know this. Now let's get more serious and look at a relevant legal case in Australia. It's called the Gutnick case. Joseph Gutnick is an Australian businessman who's had a huge impact on media law, and some say a hugely negative impact on free speech and the internet in general. The story goes like this. An American publisher by the name of Dow Jones had a magazine called Barron's. In it, American journalists wrote an article about Gutnick. Gutnick felt that the article defamed him. That is, he thought any reasonable person would argue that the article damaged his reputation. So Gutnick wanted to commence legal action. Now, initially it seemed that Gutnick would not stand a chance at winning, and the reason being that Barron's is an American magazine, mainly distributed in the US, and so Gutnick's reputation would only be soiled in the US, and since Gutnick lived and worked in Australia, this wouldn't be significant. But despite that only a handful of print copies were distributed in Australia, the fact of the matter was that there were thousands of subscribers in Australia reading the online version of the magazine. As a result, judges in the Gutnick case ruled Gutnick had the right to sue for defamation in Australia, the place he was best known. The implication of this verdict is that online information is deemed published wherever it is downloaded, regardless of wherever it was originally written and uploaded. In other words, if you write something in Australia that could harm the reputation of someone in India and you publish it online, and it's available in India, which is highly likely, you could face legal action if you travelled there. And further complicating things is this. You might think that what you write is harmless and fair enough, but as soon as you click publish and that greasy information flows online, it may find itself somewhere where the cultural values are very different from your own, meaning your harmless comments are in fact taken as severely offensive by others. Look, for example, at this report from the Telegraph in March 2015. The subject is, quote, "Man charged on teen killing murder." Now look at the difference between the print version picked up at a cafe in Sydney and the online version which could have been downloaded anywhere in Australia. It's clear the print version is a little more risky, and that's because they show the man's face, which I've pixelated as well as the victim's, and they can do it because the man is not from Sydney, and so the assumption is he wouldn't be able to sue the Telegraph for defamation since he doesn't live and work in Sydney and Sydneysiders' opinion of him aren't significant enough. You can see the online version is much safer, and that's because it could be read anywhere, and therefore the legal implications are more far-reaching, as we have seen with the Gutnick case. It's a great example of the necessary steps online publications must take to protect themselves legally, and that's because of the nature of information online as mobile and greased. Now, it's important to note too that many commentators are critical of what we could call the Gutnick effect. Kevin Balshaw, writing for Crikey, has been concerned about the implications for freedom of speech. But also he's concerned about the grey areas of the law that are revealed. For example, he asks, if an internet publisher in another country can be held culpable, what responsibility falls to the other sites that are linked to it? What responsibility lies with the ISPs, through which internet visitors in other countries view that publication? Do they become unwittingly actionable in these cases? These are all really relevant questions that need to be addressed in detail. We've seen in this lecture pod that information online is greased and how it is subject to the laws and regulations of wherever it is downloaded by a third party, which in the future could be Mars. Mark Pearson writes that each time you publish information online, you are subject to the laws of more than 600 nations, provinces, or territories. Now, it's up to you to think further about the implications of all this. Is what happened with Gutnick good for the internet and good for us? Or will it have a more chilling effect on free speech? Thanks for listening.